Have you ever felt like something was missing in your dancing? Maybe some technique or some artistry? Well, let's find out. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to ZoukNerds. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about artistry and technique. How to achieve each step and level of each of them and how to implement them together. How we, Guy and I, have achieved our level, but also how we see this as a continuous ongoing journey that will never end. So, let's go. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. My name is Alisson Sandi, and today we have once again our beautiful and amazing co-host, Guy Prada. Hello, Guy.
Hello, Alisson. Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
Today, we want to try something a little bit more deep and meaningful to us dancers and artists. We want to dive on the topic of technique versus artistry. What is the difference and what difference does it make to our dancing and our learning experience? For example, have you ever felt like something was missing in your dancing? Or when you're watching somebody dancing, you felt like you were part of some magical moment and something unique was unfolding, but you couldn't quite figure out how to do it and how to get there. Should you do more dance classes? Or should you maybe go to social dancing more? What should you do and what do we do to achieve that artistry that we strive for in our own dancing? As we were preparing for this, we had so many ideas, so we're gonna try to keep things on track here and make sure that we don't divert too much. But especially for you, Guy, there was something that really sparked when we talked about, have you ever felt like something was missing in your dancing? So let's start with that.
It is more of a story or a shared story, actually, that talks about this idea of technique and artistry, because for many years we have taught people about our ways. So we have taught the technique. And guys, there's two specific leaders who we taught so much about the technique, and they did everything really well. So technically speaking, everything was happening. There was, however, something missing. This thing that was missing, although they were doing everything technically, textbook, exactly how we instructed them to do. And I'm saying we because they were basically taking classes with me and this other teacher, because they were wanting to achieve a very specific part of the technique that we could offer them, called the whooshiness, the flow, the elasticity, all this stuff. They got it all, but there was still something missing. And now when we started talking about this topic and preparing for it, I realized they were missing the artistry of it. They knew the technique, but they were having a hard time taking ownership of the technique, like making it their own, in a way that when they express the technique, they do it in a way that is true to them. So they are not anymore doing the things that we told them to do. They're not anymore textbook correct. They are actually doing their own thing. And I was actually having this conversation yesterday with another friend, where he was complaining about the excessive technique and the lack of artistry. But of course, he was not using these words. And I gave him the example of some writers. Example of two writers that I'm forgetting right now the language, but one for sure is Clarice Lispector, which is like a Brazilian writer. And another writer called José Saramago. And the way that they write is so unique, especially Saramago, because he doesn't use punctuation the same way that we are used to. He doesn't use the comma, the period, the same way that we are used to. So looks like they are not using the language the same way, not using the grammar the same way. The thing is that they have a deep understanding of the grammar, a deep understanding of the language structures of the literature. And then they use that deeper understanding and create art in the form of writing, So what I told him was like, I think you are seeing a lot of people who are really good at grammar, but not so many poets. And I think you want to see more poetry and less, grammatically correct sentences. And then I told him, however, for the poetry to come in, I think a good understanding of the grammar, a good understanding of the basic structure of writing is really important. So it might be that what you're seeing is too much of a look into the grammar and not too much a look into the poetry, but they need each other. One, in a way, informs the other. I think the technique informs the artistry. And if sometimes you stay trapped in technique or stay trapped in the artistry and forget about each other, but so much more that we can talk about. But these are the stories that occurred to me as we were preparing, because really recent. I had these conversations, one of them literally yesterday.
Yes, and that poses the question, how much technique should or must you learn before you get into the artistry? Could you start with your artistry right away from the very beginning? Or should you take 1 year of classes, 2 years of classes, or have met certain minimum requirements, whether it's time or curriculum level, technique level, number of movements? When should you do that? Well, to me, I think artistry is something very, very personal that, yes, can be explored and can be expanded, but it's not something that you acquire from zero, because everybody has artistry. It's there. It's part of you. It's within you. Now, as a teacher, my role is to teach you the tools that will allow you to access and express that artistry, not necessarily teach you the artistry. At least in my own perspective and opinion, I've always said this to my students. I don't ever want you to dance like me. I don't believe and I don't support teachers that make minions of themselves. Coming from Rio, coming from São Paulo, we've seen this over decades and decades of dance training. You can see a certain dancer in the social or even at an international event somewhere around the world, and you can just watch them dance, and the chances are very high that you can go and ask them, hey, do you learn from this school? And they'll probably say yes, because they are copy and paste of that specific teacher. To me, this is not what I like to do. What I like to do is to make sure that every single student from the lowest level to the highest level doesn't look like me, but actually looks and expresses themselves with their own artistry and choices, which is interesting because when people dance with people that I have trained, that's the only way that they can tell that they were trained by me, by how it feels, or maybe by the certain choices of movements. But when they look at that person, they cannot usually tell, oh, that person was trained by Alisson, because the look or the expression is not something that I really pass on to the student. It's more about exploring how they feel. Now, within that topic, Guy, how do you see that as a teacher, and how did you experience that as a dancer, especially coming from a very strong school with a very strong brand like Jaime Arusha? How do you develop your own artistry, and how do you pass that on to your students?
It's a very good question, which is funny enough because I was having this other conversation with this other teacher the other day about it. The development of the artistry for me, it comes from wanting to do something and not having the ways to do that. Like I felt something in the song that I want to express in a certain way, but I didn't have the technique to do that. So my desires to express in a certain way informed what kind of technique I wanted to learn. So one feeding off from each other. Knowing the technique well allowed me to express myself in certain ways. So I started to realize over time how much more I could do in terms of musicality, in terms of floor work, of floor craft, of playing with my partner over time, because of how much of the technique I got in my body. And this was more of a silent process. I didn't realize it was happening. Only after I started teaching, and that's the interesting part, that was only after I started teaching that I started realizing, this was what was going on. This is why I learned this thing. This is why we did that lab. This is why we did that training. And basically try to convey that to the students today as a teacher. And I would say something, it's easy to work the technique as a teacher. It's easy to teach the technique. It's not easy to teach the artistry because it's subjective in a way, and sometimes people resist to it. They don't see the point. They want to know, what is it that I'm going to get from this training that I'm not seeing clearly a technical aspect being proposed or being talked about, where I can verify that I got out of that class knowing stuff that I didn't know when I got in. Because I think these things develop over time, slowly, silently. So as a teacher, what I try to do to develop the artistry is to focus on musicality when we have the time for musicality in class. Invite people to listen to the music, invite people to listen past the rhythm and the beat, the melody, the vibe, and invite people to play, showing them how can they use the technique to play with each other without feeling lost. Because sometimes people want to play, but then they play and lose the feet, lose the timing, lose the rhythm, and they don't know how to come back. So that's where we try to merge both. We have a little bit of the technique informing the way for you to play, the way that you can enjoy the music in a different way. And there's another thing too that I find very interesting. I don't know what you think about that. I'm very curious to hear what you think about that. Brazilian Zouk is an art form. It's a partner dance, which is an art form that you are mostly showcasing to this one other person, So like it's an art form of you and your partner. It's not an art form that is for other people to watch or made for other people to watch, at least not in its core, at least not in its more basic manifestation, which is dancing at the social. And I remember in my trainings at Jaime there, we had all these things to develop our subjective, to develop our crazy, develop our fun for the other person with me, for the play with each other. And sometimes I hear the aspects of artistry and technique a lot being talked about to the outside, to the other people, And sometimes I think we need to bring this back a little bit. Sometimes I forget to talk about that a little bit. You are playing for you and with this one other person right in front of you, And so I don't know how do you process that? If that comes to you at all when we are talking about these subjects, how do you see that?
I think that comes with how I describe connection. I describe connection or partnership and teamwork as being 100 plus 100 makes another 100. And don't do the math. Please don't correct us. This is just an idea that you bringing yourself 100% and your partner bringing themselves 100% will create this new 100. And who is influencing more or less may change at any point in the dance. So that's how I see the artistry. It's a conversation of what one person is feeling versus the other person is feeling. For example, I love to dance with people that are very, very expressive. I also like to dance with people who are very passive, but it's not my favorite. My favorite is when I'm receiving as much as I'm giving in terms of musicality, in terms of play, in terms of energy. Dancing with a leader or with a follower who is very much just receiving is not where I have the most fun. There's moments, maybe late, super late in the night or something like that, where I'm just connecting to the kind of music that comes with that time, which is very chill, very relaxed. And then at that moment, I'm just like, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. Am I leading? Am I following? Who knows? But in terms of artistry, in my social dancing, that's how I see it. And that's how I try to pass on to the students. For leaders to be followers and for followers to be leaders. I think that's the best combination. A leader needs to be a fluid leader-follower, and a follower needs to be a fluid follower leader. And with that, you can create that conversation. I sometimes also describe social dancing as like speed dating. So imagine speed dating. At the moment that you sit down and you have a conversation with somebody, it either flows or it doesn't. And then from then on, to make something good out of it, you're going to have to rely on your technical skills or your previous experiences. It may not be fully artistry that unravels in the moment in a beautiful, magical way that you don't even see the time passing. It may be a little bit of hard work, but the more you train and the more you learn, the better you'll be able to adapt. Which again, falls perfectly into how we see partner dancing.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And in my journey, I've noticed, as with many other things, that all of these things take time and you don't realize it's happening. However, at the same time, there are things that I realized today that were done, when I was a student, that really helped develop like both at the same time, And on the artistry level, I translated for me to make sense of it as freedom of expression and style. I don't like too much this idea of style because sometimes the style can be a little box that you put people in or you put yourself in. How many times now, Alisson, we might have heard in class, some people say, oh, but that's not my style. My style is,
Yeah, I think when people talk about style, I go into my business mindset and I think you're talking about branding. How you want people to see you or how people recognize you. So when people say, oh, Guy's style, did Guy choose it? No, he didn't choose it. Or maybe he did. Maybe it was very intentional to be that. But the style is more like the branding and the expression that people recognize you for. That's why sometimes people say, oh, that move is very so-and-so style. Yeah. That move is very so-and-so style. Oh, look at me. I look like Guy. Because they're doing something that expresses and resembles what Guy's branding is all about.
Yeah, it's an artistic expression, right? Because sometimes when I hear a song that I like, my body wants to close down, wants to go to like a cocoon, and then it wants to expand. So my trainings were all about this idea of listening to music and see what kind of involuntary motion it brings to your body and learning how to control it through the technique. And I didn't realize that was happening at all. And before I became an instructor, I was hardcore social dancer. And the artistry, when I think about this today, the artistry was because I had a good amount of a certain aspect of the technique. I could understand really well weight transfers. I could understand really well traveling and walking. So because I understood that, I could do so much with it and express what I was feeling from the music almost in an involuntary way. But that came a lot with listening to a lot of music, closing my eyes to listen to the music, moving my body to specific parts of the music. So all of this was very much trained. And that's the thing I think, Alisson, that we hear sometimes in the Nerds group, that people ask these questions. How can I become this? I'm having a hard time expressing that. I'm having a hard time getting this thing to the music. And then you see that sometimes the person has been dancing for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. There was not enough time yet for you to absorb the technique to a point that you feel, you get inspired, and then you express yourself. And I think we talked about this one episode from Alan Watts, where he says, you have inspiration, but you have to have technique. And so in order to bring heaven down to earth, and to speak heaven in terms of earth. And something else that we talked about too, I think an example that I gave when I went to see a Picasso exhibition in Brazil, where I saw his early work, was like basic drawing principles. So before he could express the artistry to the fullest that he did the basic drawing principles, the proportions and everything. And I think the same applies to us here. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I can bring back the last weekend that we had. Both of us are currently in Taiwan. I moved here and he is spending some time here. And last weekend we had a beautiful lambada training weekend with Felipe, Jessica, and Vinny. And as we were discussing about how this feels natural, this doesn't, or this is easy for one or harder for the other, Guy and I were talking about it, and I told him, I think I can kind of like feel really good about this, and I pick these things up very intuitively because in my early days of dancing, I did a lot of Cuban salsa and forró. Cuban salsa, linear salsa on one and on two, and forró, as well as all of the other Brazilian dance styles. Because I think still today, but especially back then, every school taught everything. But also every school had something that they were strong for. And my school was more like forró and the salsa's variations of styles. And for Guy, you always talk about how tango and samba was something very, very strong and present in your dancing.
Bolero.
So that naturally kind of just explored that side of your artistry, whether it was the choice of dance that transformed your artistry or whether it was your natural artistry that chose those dance styles. We'll never know. You know, we could look at it from both sides. I like high energy music. I like lots of instrument in the music. So for me, naturally, salsa and forró was just something that I was like, yes. And then I put a lot of time into it and a lot of effort into it. And then, for example, for Guy, a certain style of music and a certain style of movement was more attractive. And then you put a lot of effort and time into it. So I think this goes back to what I was saying before. Artistry is already there. You have your own artistry. Now, you need to find the tools to bring that out, to express that. It may be with the teacher that you're learning currently. It may not be. But definitely with every teacher that you learn from, you will be able to learn some tools that will help you get there. Maybe not everything, but at least something. So when we're looking at artistry versus technique, well, how do we define both? What is artistry and what is technique? So maybe I will mention technique because I'm like the technique commander, like most people say anyway. So I look at footwork, I look at timing, I look at posture, I look at shapes and geometry and mechanics of the body, how you build that connection. Is it more contracted? Is it more expanded? So I think those are kind of like the technical parts of how we're training to be expressing our own artistry. And when we talk about artistry, how would you talk about that, Guy?
Oh boy, it's a little hard, I think.
Remember, this episode is only 40 minutes.
Yes. I'm looking at the clock here like, oh my God. So artistry, I think how you use the technique. So how you choose to use the technique, how you choose to use the movements, and the way of moving your body to the music you're dancing to, the person you're dancing with, and the environment that you are. I think that's where the artistry is. And at the end of the day, I think it's musicality, it's connection. There are aspects of it that are involved in artistry, I think. And basically, I'm going to say floorcraft in the sense of how you use the space that you have available to dance. So if you're dancing in a tiny space, how do you make that happen? And that's where I think artistry lies for me.
When you talk about floorcraft, it's actually very interesting because going back to the days that I used to choreograph a lot and compete a lot, I had a session with a coach and they were talking about how when you're choreographing a piece, you need to make sure that you hit the 9 spotlights. So what does that mean? They broke down the stage as if it was like 9 squares, 3 by 3 by 3. If your choreography is too much in the center, it will give some sort of feeling of attention and drama, and something more like that. People will be very focused on that one thing. So you have to really convey the emotions way more than if you're using and you're constantly moving across the entire floor, which then you express more maybe the the happy, the party, the vibes of energy. And also how when the choreography is constantly moving, the audience's eye is constantly moving so they don't get bored. They don't start talking to their friend. They don't check their phone. They don't open something to eat, So I think that floor craft can be expressed in multiple ways. For example, in a social, whether people are watching you or not. So for example, a demo that is done pretty much on the spot versus a demo that travels across the floor, that brings that energy and invites everybody in a different way that a dance that is very much on the spot invites people in a different way.
Yeah. And when we think about like the social dancing environment, if you think about it's right there in front of you, but maybe we don't realize we are all dancing to the same song at all times, but we don't dance the same way to the same song. So that alone is the expression of artistry. Yeah. When we think about the whole, when we are engaged in watching and observing one couple dance, like in our case, as teachers, that we are watching someone dance, like in a private lesson, it's us and the person. Then we can see more in depth what's going on. But when you observe the crowds in the jungle, the next dancing, you see artistry going on at all times, because in the same song, somebody decided to travel, someone decided to stay on the spot, somebody decided to keep spinning. This decision-making process, I think for me, comes from inside, and that emotional aspect that drives you to make this or that choice is part of the artistry, So now that we talk about, there might be like in our specific case of partner dancing on Brazilian Zouk, there is this macro, which is the whole, and the micro, which is the couple or just you and your partner, And then when we talk about each of them, there might be different aspects involved just because of how much more we can observe from afar, Just by that, I think it changes a little bit the thing. Yeah. So ended up not being so long. I talk about what artistry. Oh, you know something too, Alisson? I don't know if you have this impression. If you want to challenge someone technically and maybe artistically, or to see how much they can express what they have in Brazilian Zouk, is to play a completely lyrical song. Sometimes when people want to do very powerful demonstrations, they tend to use a lyrical song. Why do you think that? And I remember in Tango one time that they did that one in silence without any music. And I remember just feeling like this constant thing in my chest by watching them dance, and somehow there was music there. And the music was their feet sliding on the floor, to create I don't know if that was the intention, no idea, but that was super powerful to me, a demo in silence. And what do you think? About this aspect? Because in our beginner class one time, it was only lyrical music, but it's still for them to find the phantom rhythm. Where is the beat? The beat is still there. It's just not evident. So find the beat. So we had this training of finding the beat in lyrical music. When we do a training with lyrical music in a more advanced way, we dance to this song here and convey these lyrics, convey this melody with your movement. And that's where we see the technical pitfalls, where we see that the person haven't mastered yet fully weight transfer, posture, speed, dynamic changes, all these things. But how do you see that correlation of lyrical music to a test of your technique and a test of your artistry?
Well, what came into my head is kind of like driving a car, right? If you put somebody who's learned how to drive, they know the basics, but they're not a professional driver or doesn't have defensive driving techniques or doesn't have the experience of driving different cities or different countries, different roads and surfaces. You put them in the city, they're probably going to do really well. There are signs, there's traffic lights, speed bumps, there's warnings of slow down, entering the freeway, something like that. But maybe put that same person and remove all of the signs, remove all of the traffic lights, but keep the traffic and the other cars there and the pedestrians there. And let me see if that person can with the knowledge that they have, understand that there is a crossing, that you see pedestrians, so you definitely should stop and pay attention, or that you're exiting the freeway, so probably I should slow down my speed because the local traffic will be at a slower speed, and things like that. Kind of like understanding without the clear guidances. Most music, for example, have a very strong and predictable pattern. So then when you put a very lyrical song that maybe doesn't follow that or even challenges that, because some of those lyrical songs, they completely break the usual radio music rules.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you really challenge the connection, the expression, the way to adapt and pay attention to each other's movement, and to be a leader that follows and a follower that leads. So that's kind of like how I see that. And maybe add one more challenge to that driving exercise. Your car may change how it responds, out of nowhere. Now your car slides more. Now your car speeds up faster, or brakes a little faster, or brakes slower. So then at every moment, you have to be 100% attentive to everything that is going on and adapting to make that driving as smooth and safe and comfortable as possible, regardless of what happens in that moment and every moment onwards.
So basically you're saying people to put them in a car in Southeast Asia, right? Just because it's bananas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Southeast Asia, for sure. I mean, not every country in Southeast Asia, but certainly some areas, or even maybe in other areas around the world. Put them there and have no signs and just go for it.
Yeah, just put someone who's not used to a roundabout to have a roundabout in a country that use a lot of roundabouts, like in Italy, for example.
Or Australia.
Or you put someone to drive in Hanoi, in Vietnam. I think it's more organized now, but my logic was...
10 years ago when I went there for the first time, they didn't have like this side goes, this side comes. It was all one. Now they have like something in the middle, and still, not everybody follows, but there is like an 80% agreement of which side goes and which side comes. But one thing that I learned, and this may be useful for anybody traveling to Hanoi in the future, or maybe other countries that are like that. Once you start crossing the road, do not stop. That is the number one rule that I learned from the locals, because I would kind of like stop and hesitate, and they're like, Alisson, once you start crossing the road, all of the people coming towards you, they're watching, calculating, and knowing where you're going to be in time in the future. If you change that, that's when you cause an accident.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, I think that can be translated to dance. Like if you're committed to a movement or to an expression, go for it. Do it. Like 3 weeks ago, I was having private lessons with 2 beautiful followers and very, very experienced followers here in Taiwan. And they were like, I want to improve my social dancing. I really want to just, feel like I can do anything in my social dancing. And then I told them, okay, I have one of my trainings here. I'm going to pull out this training. And this training is called survival training. Here's what we're going to do. We're just going to dance. I'm going to play some music and I'm just going to dance. I'm not going to worry about you. I'm really just going to go for it. Okay, of course, I'm not going to be dangerous or hurt you or break you, but I'm not going to be dancing with a student. I'm going to be dancing with somebody who is limitless, and I'm just going to try. And what I want you to do is to, quote unquote, roll with the shit. Just go. Whatever happens, if you understand, if you don't, if you do a triple or a double or you don't turn, don't worry about it. Everything that you do is going to be perfect. And you're going to accept it as perfect instead of saying, I'm sorry. Oh, shit. Oh, I didn't do this right. So kind of a training of go with the flow. Whatever happens is okay. More like to allow yourself to not do things as you thought they should be done, but still feel good about what you did in a way that you are still grounded. You still have nice feeling with your posture, your connection is still present, instead of constantly just blocking yourself from continuing. So that is something that I like to think about when developing that side of like allowing yourself to be creative and allowing yourself to accept something that you did as a positive thing instead of like, I didn't do what the leader wanted, therefore I'm in the dark side now. No.
Yeah.
Create that feeling within yourself. This is fine. And now we're only looking ahead. We're not looking backwards anymore. What's next? What's next? Whatever happened in the past, whatever.
Because I think it's a co-creation, right? Like it's, it's a co-creation. And that's the thing connecting to what I said in the beginning, the aspect of this being an art form that you do with this one other person is both the technique and the artistry are connected to how much you can communicate that with your partner. And that's the thing too. The technique, in the end of the day, for me, is the tool. Technique is the means for you to express yourself in that language that we call Brazilian Zouk. And whether or not you are being understood by your partner, that's a part of the technique. The aspects of lead and follow, the aspects of connection. And sometimes too, when partner is inspired, brings you a lot of inspiration because you are right there. And I remember so many times in which I've come to the dance, invited my partner to dance. I was in a certain mood, but then the way that that person was expressing themselves brought me, fed my soul. And then I realized I was enjoying the dance this whole different way and the other way around too. And I remember dancing with someone and then I started playing. And when I see the person is playing harder than I am. So there is this aspect of inspiration and what we call the feedback loop, right? When you do something and you receive something, which is, I think, what you were talking before, right, Alisson, that you prefer when there is this exchange, and this exchange that you're giving and you're receiving in the same amounts. For me, that's the feedback loop where you see right away the results of your expression of what you proposed. You know, sometimes the feedback loop is more calm, it's more subtle, that comes in the form of a little touch or a little smile. And sometimes the feedback loop is really expressed in the form of a giggle, in the form of a jump, right? So there's like all these ways that you see that. And for me, the aspect of artistry in partner dancing, when it relates to connection, is how much you can convey to your partner what is it that you are feeling and how much you can understand from your partner what is it that they are feeling without words, just through movement. And again, that's where the technique informs everything. You understanding balance, weight transfer, touch, posture, all these things inform, I think, this very specific and very special form of art, which is just with this one other person.
And to fully express yourself in multiple different ways, you just really have to study as much as possible. The more tools you have, the more you're going to be able to adapt. The more tools you have, the more you're going to be able to connect with different people in different music and dance in different ways. Often we find ourselves dancing in ways that we don't even intend to because of that conversation or the environment. So many layers of things that we talked about before, like there's your partner, there's the environment, there's the music, there's how you're feeling on that day, how your partner feeling on that day. And as one last thing that I want to talk about today is to bring up Guy's at Taiwan Zouk Festival, Guy's social dancing, because it was very, very interesting. And I was talking to some of my students and some other friends because I found that Guy's social dancing was very, very different from what I usually see when he's social dancing in the US. Maybe, and I want to hear about this more, but maybe it was the music, or maybe it was the environment, or maybe it was their partners that wanted that hype, high energy, playful, lots of footwork, lots of little things here and there. So what brought that Guy to life? Can you explain to us?
I think it's a phase. You know, when painters have their phases, the blue phase, the pink phase. I'm in a phase that playful side of dancing is very much alive because I'm in a moment where I'm celebrating a lot when I'm dancing, and the celebration comes in the form of play and squeezes and fast and slow and run. So all these things. And there's something about being here There's something about the environment here, about the people here that helps that come out. I think they're very playful people too, right, Alisson? There's a lightness to the way that the interactions happen.
Yeah.
And a joy. It's just so interesting. It's funny because my brother was here, and this was the first time that my brother did an event overseas. And he started dancing with me in 2006. It was his first time. And he had very similar impressions, and he was here for 7 days. And he made comments that people that have been here for longer, he said the same things, the music as well. Music here, the variety, it was just a lot of variety. At the end of the day, that was it. I felt so much joy because we were going everywhere. Like there was the music, the hyped music, the dubstep stuff, the whooshy stuff, jungle vibes. Vinny played some manga stuff. Japanese lyrical music, Taiwanese local lyrical stuff. And it was the fact that we had so much variety, it was very enticing because every time a new song came in, something else would come up and then it just built up, So I am exploring a different way of dancing for sure. I've been training that. I've been mindfully exploring dynamic changes and stuff. But I do a lot of my training, social dancing, but I train in a different way. I think when I say training social dancing, I am training perception. I'm training listening. I'm training my own awareness of connection points, my own awareness of weight transfer. It's a training that is more on the subtle skills and how I can play more. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I didn't know people. I didn't realize people for pay attention to it. I was just, living life.
I paid attention, but then when I did ask people, they're like, yeah, Guy seems to be having a lot of fun. Oh, look at him. He's like jumping around everywhere.
Bruh, I danced Thursday to Monday, almost beginning to end. Almost. There was one social that I was not there for the first DJ. One, which I think was Saturday. But Friday, Sunday, Monday, I was there for the first DJ. I was there. Boom, so much. I did so much.
That is beautiful. And that is something that we want everybody to feel, right? To understand how to bring out their best self in the artistry. And that's why we wanted to do this episode, to talk about how we see the connection between artistry and dance and how important each one of them is. I don't think artistry is more important or technique is more important. I couldn't really see which one is more important. I think it's more about how to continuously learn and continues to understand how to combine them and how to be happy with your own development at each moment. Because look, we've been doing this for 20 years and every 2 or 3 years, we're a whole new artist. We are a whole new person. Our expression is changing. So accepting that your expression and your artistry is an ongoing, forever evolving thing is part of the process. Your artistry as a beginner is valid and it's perfect. And then as you learn more, your artistry is an intermediate and on and on and on. So explore, learn, train, question, and accept that where you are and what you're doing is artistry, no matter what level.
And if I were to make suggestions on how to develop that, if I were to make one suggestion, I would highly recommend for you to listen to as many different kinds of music as possible. You, Brazilian Zouk dancer, listen to the different ways, different style, and listen to the same song like over and over again. But every time you listen, you are listening to a different thing in the music. So attuning to the music and to the different kinds of music, I think it's an incredible way for you to start training by yourself, sitting on a chair, your artistry in this dance. Yeah, so I leave here my recommendation. Yeah. Do you have anything, Alisson?
No, I think that's it. So we are set to close this episode. And thank you so much for being here once again with us. Please join us in our ZoukNerds Instagram page where we do post our short, little concise ideas from each episode and also on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much for being here. Beijos, beijos. Abraços. Ciao.
Bye, everyone.